The Singapore and Japan governments had come to a high-risk agreement to end the 7-day siege of the Laju ferry. They offered to provide officials to accompany the terrorists on a flight out of Singapore as a guarantee of safe passage. Their destination was Kuwait, where an allied terrorist group had seized the Japanese embassy and was threatening to kill 21 hostages if the Singapore group was not released.
I was to disarm them at the VIP lounge. This was a very delicate task. The VIP lounge will be completely surrounded by police. And if they refuse and there were gunshots, then I think the police will move in. Unfortunately, we had the 2 civilian interpreters with me when this plan was explained.
The terrorists entered the airport terminal just after 11 p.m. A wrong move now by Singapore police could provoke a shootout.
As we arrived at the airport, they still have the gun with the hostages. And as we were going inside the airport, one of the interpreters could not control his emotion and cried out, "Allah!" I immediately caught hold of his hand and said, "Steady, calm down, don't worry."
With safe passage assured, the terrorists released the Laju hostages at the VIP lounge. Tua Ba had to convince them to surrender their firearms.
I then approached the Palestinian leader and said that you have to disarm now. Because if you don't disarm, no plane will take you. And I told him, look, you have trusted me so far, you have to trust me now. But if you don't believe me, please, as I was going to take his gun to my head, he stopped me. He was emotional and he said very clearly, "Brother, I trust you. I'll give up all the arms." I think that releases the whole tension of the case.
Tua Ba had won their trust. At 1:16 a.m. on 8th February, the Japan Airlines plane left for Kuwait. On board with the terrorists were 2 Japanese officials, 12 airline crew, and 13 Singaporeans, including S.R. Nathan and Tua Ba. Nathan was still concerned that the Japanese would not fulfill their side of the agreement.
I knew that there were several problems. One problem was on the flight out of Singapore. We had to make sure that the plane really did not divert itself to Japan in order to get the Japanese Red Army arrested.
Nathan was worried that there were Japanese police officers disguised as aircrew. What if they attempted an arrest on board? And so precautions were taken.
So we configured the plane in such a way that we took the middle seat. We kept the hijackers at the back and we had Japanese officials at the front. And we kept them incommunicado and between ourselves.
By now, news of the flight had reached the terrorists in Kuwait. As a show of good faith, they released 4 hostages from the Japan embassy under siege. As the plane approached Kuwait, Nathan was called to the cockpit.
As we neared Kuwait, we were not too sure whether they will allow us to land. And so that was something we anticipated. And sure enough, near Kuwait, we were told that we were not allowed to land. So a decision was made and we told the pilot, you just tell them that you have just 5 minutes of fuel and you are landing, regardless.
The plane landed at dawn.
There was a lot of excitement. And as the plane was about to land, we could see that the airport was completely surrounded by armored vehicles.
Once the plane landed, we were parked some corner of the airfield, very far away from the tower. And so that's when, there we communicated with the tower. The tower wanted to know, what have you come for? I realized I couldn't tell him what I came for, because then he will refuel me and send me off. So I told him that I wanted to see the Prime Minister. Then he said, you got a Prime Minister to see you? Yes, I said, I've got instructions to see him.
After the plane landed, the Kuwaiti authorities refused to allow anyone to disembark. They also cut off all communication to the aircraft. This was unexpected.
And there was a period of long waiting again. Nobody would know what's going to happen.
What the Singaporeans didn't know was that the Japanese government had convinced the Kuwaitis to keep the plane on the ground until the terrorists at the Japan embassy in Kuwait released the hostages. The agreement was for these terrorists to join the Bukom bombers on the plane, which would then leave for another destination. Ignorant of this plan, Nathan's priority was to ensure that the Singaporeans got off the plane. His chance came when the Kuwaiti defense minister arrived at the airport.
The defense minister arrived at the tarmac. We opened the gate and I walked down to see him. And I told him who I was, what I've done. And I also told him that if anything happened to us, he and his government would be responsible. He got very angry with me. He said he got the audacity to tell me that. I said, sir, that's my instruction, my Prime Minister's instruction.